Ma'am, you need to come with us, now. The security officer's voice cut through the tense silence of the first-class cabin as Danielle Carter sat motionless, her eyes locked on the flight attendant who had accused her of not belonging. What no one on that plane knew was that the woman they were dragging down the aisle controlled a $4.7 billion contract, and she was about to bring Monarch Air to its knees. Danielle Carter's heels echoed softly against the polished floors of JFK's Terminal 4, each click a quiet declaration of purpose. She moved with the calm precision of a woman who had built her empire brick by brick, not by inheritance, but by strategy, vision, and resilience. At 39, Danielle wasn't just another well-dressed traveler in a navy blue pantsuit. She was the CEO of Atlas Global Logistics, a company that had revolutionized corporate supply chains and was on the cusp of awarding a $4.7 billion exclusive logistics contract to Monarch Air. Her platinum boarding pass was tucked neatly into the leather folio under her arm, seat 1C, first class. This wasn't indulgence, it was routine. What Danielle didn't know as she stepped toward the check-in counter was that the next 90 minutes would test everything she believed about progress, professionalism, and prejudice. The first friction came subtly. The check-in attendant, a young man in a fitted blazer with the Monarch Air logo pinned to his lapel, barely looked up when she approached. When he did, his eyes scanned her with a flicker of doubt before settling on the boarding pass she offered. His fingers tapped nervously at the keyboard. "Are you sure this is the right counter, ma'am?" he asked, voice flat but tight. Danielle gave a patient smile. "This is the priority check-in, isn't it?" She placed her government-issued ID next to the pass. The attendant hesitated, then picked up her ID and examined it longer than necessary. A line was forming behind her, but instead of processing the ticket, he picked up the phone and dialed. "Yeah, I have a guest here. Could you come take a look?" The coded language wasn't lost on Danielle. 3 minutes later, a supervisor arrived. The process repeated itself. ID, pass, another phone call. Meanwhile, a white man in khakis and a Columbia jacket walked up to the next counter and was greeted with a smile and a joke about golfing in Scottsdale. He was checked in, tagged, and on his way in under a minute. Danielle said nothing. She had dealt with this her whole career, the benefit of the doubt withheld, the invisible asterisk next to her name. But today, she took a photo of the counter number discreetly as the supervisor scribbled something on her boarding pass. "Routine security check," the woman said, voice artificially cheerful. "You're all set." Danielle took her documents back without a word. At TSA, she was pulled aside again. "A random check," they said, despite her pre-clearance status and TSA known traveler number. The blue-gloved agent opened her carry-on and pulled out her tablet, folders, and chargers, examining each with unnecessary scrutiny. Her watch and bracelet were swabbed. The agent cracked the spine of her contract binder, leaving a visible crease across the signature page. Danielle clenched her jaw but said nothing. She'd learned that fighting these small injustices only gave them an excuse to escalate. Once cleared, she repacked her belongings with meticulous care and moved to her gate, where Flight 780 to San Diego was already delayed by 20 minutes. First class began boarding. Danielle approached the gate agent and handed over her pass. The agent scanned it, frowned, and scanned it again. "Hold on a second," she said, glancing back at her monitor. "There might be a seat mix-up." Danielle felt a flicker of irritation but forced a smile. "It's 1C. I confirmed it this morning." The agent didn't respond. She waved another first-class passenger through and whispered something into her headset. Then, without making eye contact, she nodded Danielle forward. "It should be fine now. Go ahead." As Danielle stepped onto the jet bridge, she noticed the flight attendant waiting at the door, smile stretched tight, posture stiff. "First class is to your left," she said. But her eyes dropped to Danielle's ticket, then lingered on her face, registering something unsaid. In seat 1B, a middle-aged white man in a gray sports coat looked up as Danielle approached. He immediately shifted, pulling his jacket tighter around him and adjusting the distance between them. Danielle ignored him and placed her bag in the overhead bin. As she settled into her seat, tablet in hand, the man cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said to the flight attendant, who was now walking past. "Is there a problem here?" The attendant stopped. "No problem, sir. We're just confirming seating." "I paid for a first-class ticket," he said loudly, eyes still on Danielle. "I expect a certain experience." Danielle didn't look up. "You're not the only one who paid, sir," she said, her tone even but razor-sharp. The attendant offered a strained laugh and said, "I'm just going to verify something with our system." She turned to Danielle, voice lowered. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Danielle passed it over. The woman studied it as if deciphering a code. "I think there's a system error," she said finally. "Would you mind moving to another seat in the meantime while we sort it out?" Danielle met her eyes. "I will not move. This is my assigned seat. It's already been verified multiple times. There is no error." The attendant hesitated. "It's just for a moment, ma'am. To help us resolve the issue." "The issue," Danielle said slowly, "is that you and multiple staff members have questioned the legitimacy of my presence here, despite my credentials, my boarding pass, and my patience. And now, you want me to leave my seat based on a system glitch that only applies to me?" Other passengers had begun watching. The businessman beside her muttered something under his breath. Danielle ignored it. The purser arrived, trying to mask the tension with a smile. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we've had a lot of confusion with today's manifest." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "Let me be clear. If this seat belongs to someone else, please bring me the name on their ticket. Otherwise, I'm not moving." The purser paused. "Our policy allows us to reassign seating as needed. Then you'll need to provide documentation of that reassignment and a written explanation for why it applies to me and not any of the other first-class passengers you've already served drinks to," she replied. Her voice was calm, but the words cut with surgical precision. The cabin had gone quiet. Even the pilot's announcement seemed to pause. The purser stiffened, nodded once, and turned away. For a moment, Danielle thought it was over. Then came the voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced. "We're experiencing a minor security issue that requires a precautionary delay. Please remain seated." Danielle's eyes narrowed. She knew. This wasn't a delay. It was a targeting. She unlocked her phone, opened the camera app, and positioned it discreetly on her tray table, recording. 3 minutes later, 2 security officers boarded the plane. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one of them said, voice loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "What is the reason for my removal?" Danielle asked, her voice as steady as stone. "We've had reports of disruptive behavior," the officer replied vaguely. "What behavior? Who reported it? Please don't make this more difficult." "You're making it difficult," she answered. "I've said nothing. I've followed every protocol. I've asked questions, calmly. And now, you're dragging me off a plane based on vague complaints?" The officers didn't respond. One reached for her arm. She stood on her own. "Don't touch me," she said. "I'll walk. But know this, every second of this is being recorded." As they escorted her down the aisle, dozens of passengers stared. Some filmed. Others looked away. The businessman in 1B muttered, "It's about time." Danielle didn't break stride. As she passed the cockpit, she turned her head slightly and said, "I suggest your airline prepare a legal team. You're about to need one." The moment the cabin door closed behind her, Flight 780 lost its most powerful passenger, and unknowingly, the very lifeline that could have saved its future. Danielle Carter sat in the fluorescent-lit detainment room, the cold plastic chair pressing into her back as the hum of overhead lights filled the sterile silence. The sting of humiliation still clung to her like static. Less than an hour ago, she was seated in first class, prepping final notes for a $4.7 billion contract meeting. Now, her hair slightly tousled from the rough handling, her blouse damp with the residue of cold sweat, She sat across from two contracted airport security officers who had yet to offer a single explanation beyond the same hollow phrase, "You were reported as disruptive." No charges. No questions. Just detention. Danielle stared down at the scuffed metal table, her leather folio still in hand, untouched since she was yanked from seat 1C like a trespasser. Her fingers tapped it lightly, not out of nervousness, but calculation. She wasn't angry. She was focused. And every second that passed, she was reconfiguring the future of Monarch Air in her mind like a logistics algorithm. Without looking up, she reached for her phone. The guard on the right stiffened slightly. "Ma'am, you're not allowed to," Danielle raised an eyebrow with surgical precision. "Unless I'm under arrest, I have every right to make a phone call." TSA Protocol 7-14 subsection 3B, non-criminal detainment. The younger officer glanced at the older one, who gave a small, reluctant nod. Danielle dialed. It rang twice. "Harold," she said calmly, her voice low and unwavering. "Cancel the Monarch contract. Effective immediately." There was silence on the other end. Then her COO's voice dropped in tone. "Understood. Altura Air?" "Yes. They're already on standby. Move the full deal over, no delay. Full press release within the hour." "Danielle," Harold's voice softened. "What happened?" She inhaled slowly, controlled. "They dragged me off the plane like a criminal in front of half a cabin of Fortune 500 executives. No explanation. No courtesy. Just escalation. I need legal on standby. And get comms prepped. The videos have already started leaking." As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text from one of the firm's in-house counsel, "Passenger video of your removal trending on X. Over 250K views in 30 minutes. Danielle locked her screen and stood. The officers watched, uncomfortable now. The tide was shifting and they could feel it, even if they didn't yet know why. She didn't look at them as she said, "You may want to contact your legal department." Across town, in the glass-walled boardroom of Monarch Air's Manhattan headquarters, CEO Gregory Langston paced as if it might help him outrun the disaster. "What do you mean she was removed from the plane?" he barked into a phone on speaker. Around the long table, executives shifted in leather chairs, some pale, others furiously typing on tablets. "She was flagged by the crew as combative," the director of flight operations said weakly. "There was a seating discrepancy and discrepancy?" Langston snapped. "That woman is Danielle Carter. The Danielle Carter, CEO of Atlas Global. You remember, the company we've been courting for the past 9 months?" A stunned silence fell. The CFO cleared his throat. "We didn't know, and why didn't we know?" Langston's voice was cold now. Controlled. "Why didn't anyone on that flight know what she looked like? We've had 8 meetings, 3 dinners, a keynote. You let your flight crew eject a woman who was about to sign the largest corporate contract in this airline's history." The legal counsel at the table leaned forward. "Sir, there are videos online now. It's already a top trend. Multiple angles, multiple passengers. It's clear she did nothing wrong. The flight staff initiated everything." "How bad is it?" someone asked. A marketing director turned his laptop around. "This bad." On screen, Danielle could be seen standing calmly, refusing to move from her seat, asking for documentation. Then, 2 officers arrive. She's pulled from her seat as gasps ripple through the cabin. A woman across the aisle can be heard saying, "Why are they doing this to her?" Another voice says, "That's not right. She didn't do anything." The video ends with the cabin falling into stunned silence. "We need to fix this," the CFO said. "Apologize. Make a statement." Langston looked as though the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. "It's too late." Back in her chauffeured car en route to Atlas Global's headquarters, Danielle opened her laptop and joined a virtual call. Her media team was already running a full brief. We're drafting the formal press release now, her PR director said, framing it as a response to widespread discriminatory treatment. We've already secured early interest from 3 networks. Lead with video. Don't soften it, Danielle said. And I want the quote front and center: every business relationship is built on trust. Monarch Air broke that trust in full view of the world. And Altura Air? Announced the exclusive partnership. Emphasized shared values. Passenger dignity. Equity. Put them in the spotlight. Let the public see there are better options. Understood. By the time she arrived at Atlas HQ, her entire executive team was mobilized. News outlets were already calling. Industry blogs were breaking the story with headlines like Monarch Air faces backlash after forcibly removing black female CEO from first class. Shareholders were panicking. Monarch stock dropped 9% in the first hour. At Monarch Air's boardroom, the panic was now palpable. Langston sat with his tie loosened, face pale. Legal's saying there's no way to spin this, one executive murmured. If they cut us from the deal, our projections fall by 42% next quarter. We already got the termination notice, the VP of Contracts said grimly. Atlas is moving to Altura. Effective immediately. Langston leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the glowing screen showing Danielle's calm, composed face as she exited the airport, surrounded by media, escorted by staff, not security. This was our shot, he muttered. And we dragged her off the plane. He looked around the table. We need to find a way to fix this. The chief of communications didn't look up from her phone. You don't fix a $4.7 billion mistake. You survive it. Monarch Air's brand was hemorrhaging by the hour. Employees were leaking internal memos. Former passengers were posting their own experiences with racial bias under the hashtag Monarch mistake. Meanwhile, Danielle stood in front of the cameras at a press conference flanked by Altura Air's CEO, her voice resolute but graceful. Every person deserves respect when they fly. Not because of how they look or how they're dressed, but because they're human. Her words were calm. But the industry felt the quake. Altura's stock soared. Monarch's plummeted. Across America, airline boards scrambled into emergency meetings. The phones at Monarch's investor relations office rang without pause. The damage was irreversible. In a single morning, Danielle Carter had transformed from a passenger forced off a flight to the catalyst of a national conversation. The most powerful statement she made wasn't with a lawsuit or a protest. It was a phone call, 6 words that reshaped the future of an entire industry: cancel Monarch. Move everything to Altura. Danielle Carter stood at the head of the mahogany conference table inside Altura Air's sunlit headquarters, her silhouette framed by a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass revealing the Atlanta skyline. Behind her, the city buzzed with life, but inside the room, time seemed to pause. A dozen high-ranking executives from both Atlas Global Logistics and Altura Air sat in crisp silence, watching as Danielle poised her Mont Blanc pen above the final page of a historic contract. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The moment carried its own gravity. With a single stroke of ink, she secured the largest corporate air travel contract in aviation history, $4.7 billion in exclusive logistics and executive travel services. A contract that had been Monarch Air's to lose. And they had. Spectacularly. The sound of her signature was barely audible, but the impact would ripple through industries. Applause followed. Cameras clicked. Champagne bottles uncorked. And just like that, the company Monarch had dragged off a plane without a second thought had reshaped the skies above them. Danielle accepted congratulations with a graceful nod, but her mind was already ahead, racing through post-signing media interviews, final messaging, and the statement she would make that afternoon at Howard University's School of Business, her alma mater and a place that had once taught her the power of presence in rooms that weren't built for her. As she moved through Altura's marble atrium toward the press hall, her assistant, Marcus, rushed up beside her. Danielle, Forbes, CNN, and CNBC are all locked in for tomorrow. NPR's requesting a sit-down this evening. She nodded. Prioritize Forbes. We need business leaders to hear this message first. Already done. And the Wall Street Journal just dropped a feature headlined, "The Day Monarch Got Grounded." Outside, the press was waiting. Inside, Monarch Air was crumbling. At Monarch's New York headquarters, chaos wasn't even the right word anymore, it was implosion. Stock had dropped over 71% in 48 hours, and financial analysts were already debating Chapter 11 timelines on national television. CEO Gregory Langston sat at the head of the same boardroom table where, just days ago, he had mocked concerns over a passenger incident. Now, he was surrounded by attorneys, PR firms, and an increasingly furious board of directors. The footage of Danielle's removal had been seen by over 83 million people in 72 hours. Passengers were canceling tickets. Shareholders were withdrawing. Partners were cutting ties. Worse, the Department of Transportation had launched a formal investigation into the airline's handling of discriminatory reports. Gregory had not slept in 2 days. His face was pale, jaw tight, hands clasped in front of him as if holding on to what little control he had left. "What's the damages of this hour?" he asked, voice brittle. 73% down in market value, the CFO said, barely looking up from the screen. "Our operating line was just pulled by the bank." The chief counsel added, "Also, the class action has been filed on behalf of passengers who witnessed the event and employees who faced retaliation after speaking up." "And Danielle Carter?" Gregory asked, his voice catching slightly on her name. "She just signed with Altura," someone said. "Press conference is in 20 minutes. Gregory exhaled through his nose and stared at the glossy table. "We need a statement." "We've issued 2 already," the communications director said. "Nobody's listening." "Not until there's accountability." "Then let's give them accountability," one board member snapped. "Start with you, Gregory." At 3 p.m., Danielle stood before a packed auditorium at Howard. The students, young, ambitious, full of questions and fire, watched with wide eyes as she spoke. There was no script. Just her voice. Steady. Measured. Clear. "What happened to me on Monarch Air was not unique. What made it national news was that I had the platform to make it visible," she began. "But every day, people of color are told, sometimes subtly, sometimes loudly, that they do not belong. In boardrooms. In first class. In leadership. In freedom." The auditorium fell still. "We are done asking to belong," she said, her voice now resonant and rising. "From now on, we build spaces that honor us. We create contracts that reflect our values. We make sure that dignity is not a privilege. It's policy." Thunderous applause broke out. That evening, Altura Air released its new Passenger Dignity Charter, a set of industry-first policies requiring implicit bias training for all staff, live monitoring for discrimination complaints, and a zero-tolerance protocol for bias-based removals. Every flight would now feature signage at the entrance of premium cabins stating clearly, "Every traveler deserves respect." Status is earned, but dignity is a right. Danielle's impact didn't stop there. The Danielle Clause, as it came to be known in legal circles, began appearing in travel procurement contracts nationwide, clauses that gave clients the right to terminate agreements if any form of discrimination was reported. Airlines scrambled. Some resisted. Most followed. Because the cost of failing to change had now been made crystal clear. Meanwhile, Monarch Air's board held an emergency press conference. The company's senior leadership had been terminated. CEO Gregory Langston's resignation was announced, effective immediately. But the mea culpa was too late. The public had moved on. The market had moved on. Danielle Carter had moved on. And the name Monarch Air was already becoming a case study in how corporate arrogance and unchecked bias could bring down even the most established brands. 3 weeks later, Danielle Carter boarded an Altura Air flight bound for Paris. As she stepped into the cabin, the flight attendant smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Carter. It's an honor to have you flying with us." Her seat, 1C, the same position that once sparked an unnecessary storm, was immaculate, set with fresh orchids and a note from the crew, "Thank you for raising the bar for all of us." She took her seat, leaned back, and glanced up. Near the first-class entrance, a brushed gold plaque was mounted on the wall. It read, "Every traveler deserves respect, status is earned, but dignity is a right." Danielle smiled. Not because she'd won, but because she had rewritten the rules for everyone else who would come after. As the author of this story, I want to leave you with more than just a narrative. I want to leave you with a message that lingers long after the screen fades to black. Danielle Carter's experience may have been fictional, but the injustice she faced mirrors the real-life stories of countless individuals who are judged not by their actions or credentials, but by the color of their skin and the assumptions that follow them. The lesson here is simple but powerful. Dignity should never be conditional. It should not depend on how someone dresses, how much they earn, or where they come from. It certainly should never hinge on outdated biases or personal insecurities. Danielle didn't raise her voice, she didn't fight back with insults, she stood her ground with grace, intelligence, and purpose. She let the truth speak louder than emotion and let consequence become her reply. There is a distinct strength in calm resistance. A strength we must all learn to carry. For those who have ever felt dismissed, disrespected, or invisible, you are not alone. Whether it happens in a boardroom, on a flight, in a store, or in a school hallway, remember this: you are allowed to take up space. Your presence matters. And if someone ever tries to strip that away, know that justice may not always be immediate, but your dignity is not up for negotiation. And for those listening who may not have faced this kind of prejudice themselves, let this story open your eyes, not just to sympathy, but to action. Speak up when it matters. Advocate for fair treatment, even when it doesn't benefit you directly. Don't be a silent bystander to injustice, because silence, in the face of discrimination, becomes complicity. Here at Us Justice Stories, we believe storytelling is a powerful tool for change. Through stories like Danielle's, we aim to spark conversations, challenge systems, and elevate voices that have long gone unheard. These stories are more than entertainment, they are mirrors and windows. Mirrors for those who've lived it. Windows for those who haven't. And bridges for those who are finally ready to understand. To our listeners, thank you. Thank you for showing up. For caring. For watching all the way to the end. Every view, every share, every comment is a step toward awareness. And awareness is where change begins. If this story moved you, we invite you to subscribe, to speak out, and to stand up. Not just for Danielle, but for the many real people she represents. Until the next story, stay alert, stay compassionate, and remember, justice isn't just a courtroom word, it's a daily practice.